Well, g'day and welcome back to wherever you're listening from. We're on for another episode of the StoneX Australian Cattle and Beef Market Report. My name is Ripley Atkinson, the Australian Livestock and Commodities Manager for StoneX based in Sydney, where we're developing price risk management tools for the Australian beef industry to help the sector manage market and price volatility with our Australian cattle swap. We're brought to you by StoneX Group, a Nasdaq-listed global financial services network with 100 years of experience in global commodity markets. Remember that the trading of derivatives such as futures, options, and over-the-counter products or swaps may not be suitable for all investors. Derivatives trading involves substantial risk of loss, and you should fully understand the risks prior to trading. Past results are not necessarily indicative of future results. Well, for this episode, we're fortunate to have on the podcast Cyril Close from TopX Roma and TopX Australia. Cyril, mate, great to have you on. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, pleasure, mate. Thanks for the opportunity.
As a start, for listeners, give us a bit of a rundown of your role in the beef industry, where you're from and what you're up to.
Yeah, it's been a good ride, mate, since 1984 when I first left boarding school. I've worked in the agency sector and mainly all across Queensland in the early years, being transferred around the state in merchandise and livestock roles. And in about 1986, 87, I got the opportunity to do some auctioneering at that little town I was at in Miles, Queensland, and I had a real passion for that. It was a good adrenaline rush. In the early days, there was no training or whatever else. It was just you stood up there and the boss took the book off you and said, "Right, you start selling now." So that was the best introduction you can get, because you either sank or swim. Luckily enough, I swam along and did a bit of dog tattle for a while, mate, and yeah, that became a passion, and it became a driving force for myself in the industry to, just want to be the best at that and want to have the opportunity to be able to be a livestock auctioneer and marketing cattle. And so that led me across Queensland into different parts of the state over different years, to Rockhampton, to Charters Towers, and then 30 years in Roma this year. So we've had a very great life in the livestock agency business, and being in Roma now is one of the sort of indicating hubs of the markets, and it's action stations week in, week out. So it's a great place to sort of do your twilight years of the agency game.
Bit of a journey, that's for sure.
Yeah, it has been, mate, and a journey that's been filled with lots of great mentors along the way, from all sides of the fence, from auctioneers to in your business and then out of your business as opposition, and then also from the buying fraternity, the relationships and the connections that you make through that side of it is it sort of helps set your path. And it is even though we are all enemies out in the field, we do get together a heck of a lot and share some good stories and have some good times. So it is, the camaraderie is very, very solid.
And that's a special part of ag in general, I reckon, and something that's pretty important for everyone.
Yeah, well, it is, and just having connections with people that are like-minded keeps you rolling along and keeps you the competition in your step, I suppose, to either be as good as them or better than them. And my motto has always never been, there ain't no second prize, so I'd rather be the one in the front, but there's always someone there trying to mow you down. So it's a great life and a great industry.
So moving into sort of what's going on currently, give us a bit of a rundown on your perspective in terms of season, where things are at in the areas you're familiar with and work in, and how are things tracking generally across the country you cover.
Yeah, so we the Marinara region is mainly cattle. There aren't many sheep through this area, so it's mainly a cattle and cropping district. We have enjoyed a very, very good summer and a good autumn, and that's pretty much said for most of Queensland. And the eastern seaboard would probably say that they've well and truly had enough weather events that way, but inland, we've been fortunate enough that the balance has been pretty right for a change, and nearly the whole state is in quite a healthy situation going into the winter months, where the feed sort of goes static and you rely on your crops and supplements to get cattle through. So it'll be as good a season as you'd want to see across the state of Queensland, particularly the Marinara district. The crops are in the ground. There's wheat, there's barley, there's oats. So they are great staples for this time of the year when the frost hits the major species of grasses to take the protein out of those. So all's good for cow and calf operations, and all's pretty good for trading operations. We've seen just a good static supply of numbers into the marketplace. Early in the year, it was just ticking along, and then when the roads dried out a couple of months ago, the trucks got into gear and moved a heck of a lot of cattle in a very short period of time. That did put a bit of pressure in the market for 4 or 5 weeks, and now it's sort of seemed to be just coming out the other side of that a little bit, where the cattle are still moving, but that initial flush of cattle after that wet period have sort of gone through.
You and I spoke about this exact situation, I'm going to say a month ago, and you said it surprised you the number of cattle and some others that you were talking to. It had surprised you the number of cattle moving out of the northwest to Queensland. Obviously, it affected everywhere else as well because there was a lot more accessibility. But can you just explain your views on why that transpired the way it did, and now that numbers are, as you mentioned, sort of ticking along at what you might call normal? Where do you reckon the sort of flush and that hurry of numbers came quickly? What's your views?
It's never ever one, particular trigger point, I suppose, out of that. But as we said, there was a really good wet season for a big part of the state, which runs the big numbers. And so once their roads dried out, the prices were pretty jolly good back 6 or 8 weeks ago. So I think, and we go back to what I said initially, is that pretty much the whole state is in a really good situation. And normally that's not the case. There's normally a couple of dry pockets. And so the flow of cattle is sort of trickles through the system in an orderly manner. I think that this year it's a bit exceptional in that it was so wet over such a big area, and then when it dried out, it all dried out at the same time, and the timing came for people to start doing their mustering anyway, no matter what the weather was doing, and it was just a perfect storm where all the trucks hit the road at the same time. They hit feedlots, meatworks, sale yards, and there was a little bit of a glut. But we're nearly 4 to 6 weeks through that now, and that pressure seems to have come off a hell of a lot. But I just reckon it just happened to be a period where probably the simplified is that the roads got dry all at the same time, and everyone got to get mustering at the same time, and probably need the cash flow as well, and needed to move cattle on. So it all just came together on that perfect storm.
And going the other way, we're talking about Queensland at the minute and the strength of the season more broadly. Northern New South Wales, or certainly north of Dubbo, which I've spoken about on this podcast a fair bit, is solid. Have you ever seen the number of cattle move from the south as far north as they have into Queensland in your career?
Oh, for certain, mate. Over different years, definitely. And we've seen cattle. I know in the early 90s when I first came here, we were bringing cattle up out of South Australia up to here. The market was devastated down there, and Victoria, where they're getting smashed with the season now, we were bringing cattle up here, and late 90s, early 2000s, like buying cattle out of the bottom end of Victoria and right across to Lucendale and whatever else in South Australia. And we were doing that for months at a time. So it has happened before, mate. It's probably just a bit more consistent this year. It sort of started last year, and the price differential was enough for these buyers to be able to go that far and pick those cattle up. And it's the same again. So yeah, I definitely seen it before, mate. And it'll happen again.
And while you're talking on that, what about the consideration of moving, these lighter Angus steers, into central Queensland? Is that something that you've seen before? And I don't know, just from a personal perspective, you move cattle out of the Riverina in New South Wales or the Southern Tablelands and drag them up to Longreach. They're not exactly in the same climate. Weight gain, performance, like I'm expecting a lot of those cattle are going to turn up at a minimum in Q4 24 or Q1 25. What do you think? What do you see there, and what are your views on those really light cattle, particularly black cattle coming up that far?
Yeah, that's one that it from one year to the next will make a liar out of you, essentially. You might have a really good run in a season like this when the weather's mild and the season's good, and it's a transition, whether it's in a winter period or a summer period, when you move cattle from one district to another. So yeah, it'll be one of those watch and see moments, I think. I mean, there's no problem. Those cattle have come to this, Maranoa district for a number of years, and the climate is quite, kind in the fact that they do seem to do that transition not too bad. Further north of here, that will be interesting, but we are seeing more and more Angus bulls going into the central Queensland, into that Tiki area over the last 6 to 10 years. So it's going to be interesting. They probably haven't been going there in the numbers that they have in a year like this and last year, but we'll have to wait and see, mate, how that performance is, and then that's also driven by how their season rolls and whether they get a long hot summer or whatever. But the price differentials are there. They can afford to go and buy those cattle from there. And there's only one way to find out, I suppose, is go and get a few and give it a go. So it's good to see, and we'll just have to wait. I mean, myself, we've purchased cattle for clients out of all those districts, as I said, over the years, and we've had mixed results. We've had great results some years, and then other years we've just line ball. We'd have been better off buying them at home. But you do what you do in the situation you're in and what you can afford to do and where the supply of cattle is. So just because it doesn't make it right one year, it doesn't make it won't be that way the next year. So I think it's a personal preference thing, mate, and I really just think it's a seasonal thing, mate, where the opportunities are there with the grass that's at hand.
And talking on performance for your, considering the season that we've discussed, how are your, my expectation is the fertility rates in the northern herd's going to be very strong this year because of the season. How are you, what are your discussions with clients looking like, and in the sense of how, their breeding herds and their cows performing? Are you seeing strong rates? Have you seen a genuine improvement in the last 5 to 10 years across your clients, performance and fertility in the cows? Give us a bit of a rundown on that.
Yeah, well, that's right. I mean, the industry's just going ahead in leaps and bounds in the feed stock game, and the opportunities are there for so many people to buy so many different classes of animals to work out what works in their environment. But the one thing, probably the thing that sticks out to me is, when I came here in 1995, I think there was about 3 vets in Roma that did a bit of back testing and whatever else. Now I think one particular vet surgery here has got 12 to 14 full-time vets, and they're this time of the year break testing at a phenomenal rate. So if that's not driving and telling you that the people are screwing their herds down to a way more performance-based situation, that was one thing that sort of hit me between the eyes there, a bit slow at picking things up. But that was one thing a few years ago that I went, right, well, there's obviously the work there. And I just know our clients, they're testing their cows, they're testing their bulls. Against 20 years ago, few people freak tested cows. No one semen tested bulls, let alone the bulls that they just bought and had it for a few years. So now it's just part and parcel of the whole program. So it's nothing now to get talk to people, and if they're under 90%, they're very disappointed in their calving rates. So I think it's just it's a positive thing that, country's dearer. You've got to screw as many dollars return out of that per acre country that's, tripled in time over the last 10 to 15 years. So you've got to get every cow having a calf, and you've got to get a high dollar value calf on the ground to make those numbers add up a little bit, mate. And they probably still don't, but that's just one good thing that I can see people that are doing in their herds. So, fertility rates, without looking at any numbers, just to me, looking at the basic signs, they should be definitely on the climb.
And not necessarily on the cows themselves, but on the producers that have them, how would you call sentiment at the minute in terms of, how are people feeling? Conversations you have, you cover a pretty big area. What would you call the confidence level and how are they feeling?
I think it always boils well when you got a good season. That's step one. So, as we spoke earlier in the podcast, that the season is, very favourable across most of the state. So that gives people options. There's nothing, and I know there's been floods in the western parts and that sort of thing, and that's caused havoc and chaos and whatever else, and that throws a spanner in the works for those people out there with their normal productivity. But it also brings an enormous amount of feed and opportunity. So barring that corner of the state that's been devastated by that, the losses out there, they'll get back on their feet in time. But there's also options there. There's look at South Australia and Victoria now that they're running out of water and they're running as much as they're running out of feed. So I would say the sentiment up here is quite buoyant, mate, in comparison to other states at the minute. And there's a lot of good reason for that. The market's in pretty healthy state. The season's very good. So that just gives people options. And with those options there, it just makes life a little bit easier, that you can either decide to sell that animal or take it through to another weight bracket, or join them with a few more heifers than you normally do, or a few other cows, or keep them for another year longer. So all of that just, it bodes pretty well for a pretty good, attitude out there in the bush.
And I think you've only got to look at the market and where cattle are being drawn from in Queensland, which to me gives a pretty good sense of how people are feeling. If they're willing to pay up $4.50, $5 in places for a weaner steer, I think that's a pretty clear indication people are comfortable and have confidence in, 3 to 6 months of feed in front of them to do a trade. And I think that's, been a real hallmark of this year, is that northern demand has actually underpinned the whole national market, and certainly at least the eastern seaboard. And without it, the market would be in a materially different position, because the demand wasn't there. And I think demand and confidence, certainly at a producer level, go hand in hand. And I think that the people you're talking about and clients of yours, without that interest from them generally and their peers in other parts of the state, the market wouldn't be where it is. And I think that's been a real positive of this year, and we're only halfway through it, is Queensland and its interest in buying cattle.
Yeah, and that's spot on. And it also looks not too bad for this last half of the year too, that it's the tap's not going to totally turn off for us. We'll scrape through And, if you've had good rain in most of the state up until that around that Easter period, it's generally enough to get you through till you September and October, and then you start looking over your shoulder again. But no, look, I think that is the biggest thing. As I say, if you've got grass in the paddocks, it just gives people options. If there's crop in the ground, it gives people options. They can either graze it or they can bury it and for tough times ahead. So that the sentiment out there is, whether it's in the breeding or the trading game, it just seems to be pretty up at the minute.
Mm. And on the market in general, how would you call it? The cow job I feel's been up and down like a yo-yo, but more broadly, what would you call the market at the minute?
I think in a very healthy state at the minute. I'm very aware that every time we turn around, our costs of production are going up, and you've got to keep in mind that is just nipping at your heels the whole time. So the market is in a good state, but it doesn't need to be any less than it is, because those costs of productions keep running up behind you. So this probably, as I was talking to a few fellas earlier this morning, if you can get your weaner steers making in your mid $4 bracket, your heifers are making mid threes pretty consistently now. Your feeder steer job seems to be at $3.70 to $80. A domestic steer seems to be nudging $3.80 through to $4.10 or $20. A bullocks are making $3.40 to $6.00, depending on what they are and where they're at. A cow's $2.80 through to $3.10. You do your numbers on that. I don't. If you could just say that was your line ball each year, I think a lot of people would sign up, mate. But we always want to see more, but it's got to be relevant. And I think there's still people that are looking over their shoulder from when they were buying the $2,200, $2,300 weaner steers and then sell them for $1,600 and $1,700. I'm sure no one wants to go down that track again. So as much as we would like, we always want to squeeze as much out of them as we can. I think it's just not at a bad level. That for both sides of the fence are probably ticking along all right. And then that comes down to supply and demand, and we're in a pretty solid supply period, as we spoke about earlier. And if we can maintain that level through this high supply period, things should look all right for the latter part of the year,
Yeah, and I think, you made the point about the other side of the fence. I think I said it last week or the week before. At the minute, the market to me seems sustainable. The feeder can make a quid on most categories they're going to feed. I feel like the producer can still generate a decent return on whether it be that trade cattle or vendor bred cattle. And then through to the processor and the exporter, everyone is making money at the minute. It doesn't happen often, and I think that's a good thing. And you talk about the processor and exporter and link that with supply. I just had a look at the May numbers of Savo. May exports at another record. Year-to-date exports are already 15% higher than last year, which equates to about 70-odd thousand tonnes. And last year was a record. We're producing a lot of beef, but we're also moving a lot of product overseas. And I think that's a real positive that we can't forget, because, there's a lot going on in the world at the minute, but Australia's still got the capacity and there's still a home for what we're producing. And I think that's pretty important. Particularly at a time when there is so much happening outside of our control, it shows you that the market demand is there for what we produce. And I think that's something we should be pretty proud of.
Well, that's right. I mean, we are an exporting nation, aren't we? And the fact is we can't eat it all here locally and domestically. So whether we're live exporting it or we're sending it over in a chill situation or frozen, we definitely need those markets. And it would be not a good situation to be in if we couldn't have those doors open to us. So and that's another thing that sort of keeps, I think, people's moods up as well, is that same story there are options for the processors to be selling product into different markets. And it's a very competitive world out there, but obviously we've got a good product and we stand behind it. So we just need to continue to get paid for it. That's the trick.
You just mentioned processes and competition, have you seen, in terms of the southern processors coming up to Roma this year, is there anything either them or the processors based in Queensland are telling you? Is there anything that, conversations you have with them on the rail are you've sort of picked up and found interesting?
Yeah, well, it's their ongoing conversations week in, week out. But the local processors, the Queensland-based processors, they've got cattle in front of them for 3 to 4 weeks. If you're trying to get some space, that seems to be, a 3 or 4 week period out to get a price. You can always book space without a price, obviously, but to get a price, it's, at least seems to be about 3 weeks out, not much shorter than that. We have seen competition from the southern processors. They've stuck their nose up here over the last sort of 3 to 4 weeks. Not in any major fashion, but they've indicated that there's still a flush of cattle coming through down there. But once that shortens up, which as we know it will, they'll be back up here in more earnest, and we should hopefully be able to help them out because, as we've said all along, the season's good. There's good weight in the cattle, and then that'll put a few more people in the buying panel, and should keep a pretty healthy competition in the job for a few more months in your cull cows and in your bullocky fellas. The feeder job's a major part of the world these days, and there's nowhere near the bullocks around as it was 20 years ago, but there's still a portion of them out there. So that just keeps that competition healthy there for the people that have got those weight cattle.
100%. As we look to wrap up, you've been around a while, mate. I'd be interested in your views on, in your career, what you believe is the biggest change you've seen in the beef industry, since your career began to today. What would it be?
I would probably say the technology side of it, as in the short time that I've been in the game, and when I first came to Roma 30 years ago, used to do 80 to 90,000 kilometres a year, no dramas at all, travelling around buying cattle and whatever else. And maybe I'm getting too old and too slow now too. I only seem to be doing 40 or 50,000 a year. But I think the technology of marketing of livestock and that's why I joined TopX initially, was the platform that they had designed, and they were one of the leaders in the industry for a web-based platform and selling cattle by description, away from an auction scenario like Auctions Plus. TopX, they were the first ones to do that, and that was why I came across to this business, and that's just ramped up and gone tenfold since it started. And we first start putting a few cattle on Facebook, and people going, that won't work. And well, now, and then you look at market reports, everyone's got to be on Facebook. The information highway in the industry that has just slammed place first into everyone in the last 10 to 15 years, I think, is probably the quickest and the biggest change that I've noticed. There's lots of other smaller changes out there, but I believe that technological sale by description, photos, videos, the accessibility to a lot more cattle than you could ever get access to, that'd probably be my, the highest one on my calendar, I reckon, mate. That's come thick and fast, and will continue to do so.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting you say that, because it's not only online now, but you can be calling someone at the other end of the continent, and being able to line up and connect with people. It does show how quickly it has moved, and I think if it's moved at that rate, we've only got to imagine what it's going to be in another 5 years.
Well, that's it. For dinosaurs like myself, mate, as you have attested to, we'll get left in the dust. But it just keeps coming at you, and you try and stay abreast of it. But it's exciting. It can be very wearing, and it's just a whole different way of marketing livestock compared to when I first started. And it's been great to have that journey and see that and be part of the good old style, get on the phone and, sell cattle and take buyers out and look at them and whatever else. But time is money, and these days that's, becoming a lost art, and it's changed and doesn't make it for the better or for the worse, but it allows people to get access to a heck of a lot of cattle a lot quicker.
And I think can only be seen as a good thing.
Yeah, for sure. Yep, just because there's such a fine line in the job, as we've spoken about through the conversation, that you need every bit of marketing edge that you can possibly get.
Yeah, 100%. Mate, is there anything that we've missed?
Oh, no, you could talk about, that's a good thing about the industry. You can just be on the phone all day talking to different people about different parts of it, and there's always something to talk about in there. But the topical part of it is, I think the market's in a healthy state. I think the season for us in Queensland, we're in a very, very healthy state, and we'll make the most of it while we got it, because we know it'll all change again one day, and we just hope we can keep these doors open for the great product that we got, and keep getting a good return.
Mate, 100%. That wraps us up, Cyril. Thanks for making the time today on the Australian Cattle and Beef Market Report podcast. Mate, I've really enjoyed this one. It's always good to talk to you, get your insights, listen to to your views and perspective and what you're hearing. So, yeah, thanks for jumping on, and appreciate you taking the time out of your day.
No, mate, it's great, and it's great to be on board, and like what you're doing, and offering another option and another advantage out there for people to look at. And it's let's watch this space.
No, I appreciate it. And as always, questions are always welcomed. So if any of you or people are interested in asking one, send me an email to ripley.atkinson@stonex.com, or record a voice note of yourself, where you're from, and send it to me, and we'll answer it in the next episode. Next time, back into the markets for the first 3 weeks of June and what's been going on. And if MLA's Beef Producer Intention Survey is out, I will get stuck into that and give my views and perspective on what that means. I am pretty keen to see the numbers in this one. So if it does arrive, be good to share it with you all. But until then, thanks for listening. Take care, and we'll see you next time. Cheers.